Welcome back to Tiny Blue Games. My name's of course Csaw or Chris, and today we are talking about Final Fantasy XIV in 2020. Today we are checking out the first trial in Heavensward. I'm not going to even try and pronounce the title of this trial, as I'm going to do a bad job and it also makes me sound like I'm saying a bad word, so we're just going to leave it on the screen and in the title of the video, and that will be that. The entrance of this Primal, it's the Gnath Primal? Gnath? They're like little bug people. The entrance is super cool. He's got like these 4 blades and he's kind of like a bug but kind of robotic. He reminds me of General Grievous from Star Wars because he's so about his blades. Super cool. And more than that, before the actual trial, there was a really cool entrance where we have Shiva facing off against this general, which was one of the coolest cutscenes I've ever seen because it's just so interesting seeing 2 primals fight each other. We got very much someone who's focused on force and blades versus someone who's obviously about ice and cold. And it's just interesting because we actually faced off against Shiva in a past trial. So it's really weird to see our enemy working against our current enemy, which I guess really has to do with kind of the Heavensward story as it goes on. But I very much enjoyed this part of the story. I thought it was really cool. I thought it was super cool seeing some of these different attacks that Shiva has, and kind of her way of trying to, I would say outsmart, kind of like she keeps trying to freeze him and catch him in these different positions, but he's clearly just a stronger creature, as we see at the end here. And it's just interesting because she's kind of like attacking him to make it so we don't have to fight them, and now we just have to fight him again on some level by ourselves, but we know we're going to do it with 8 people or 7 other people. So it's interesting that she didn't just join us in battle to begin with and just make it a lot easier. But what are you going to do? Let's get into the trial. We've got our 7 lucky people and myself who are going to shred this up. Kind of. It doesn't go super well. It takes 3 attempts, which, you know, I like the difficulty. I enjoyed, there was a ton of mechanics in this. There's a ton of ways to die, and I explore some of those ways as we progress through this. I do take some clips from all 3 of the trials because some of them I do really well in, others I do not so great in. Notably, the one that we do end up finishing it off, I'm like the only person who dies, and we'll get into that in a second. Clearly, I was the one holding us back, but I figured I'd start from the start and we'd work our way through. So this is our first attempt, and I think overall we did pretty well. The thing that kills us here, and we'll get to it eventually, is ultimately not killing the ads quick enough, and that's such an important part of every Primal fight, it seems. But there's so much more going on before that. For instance, we can see here, once his bar gets to full, it's called his Bloodlust, he kind of shifts into these different stances. One of them seems to do like more damage, but he takes more damage. One of them's more defensive and he does some different attacks. So there's a lot of different things he does. You also notice that there are a lot of things on the ground between the phase shifts, so you kind of always have to be watching where you're going, which is very, you know, typical in Final Fantasy XIV fights. There's a lot of dancing around, and you've kind of always got to be ready to jump in and out of things, which is pretty easy on itself, but when you have to balance that with kind of seeing where everyone else is, we're seeing where the boss is positioned, with trying to do your rotation, which isn't too difficult at this level, but there's definitely certain skills that I kind of need to use in an order on my Dragoon, so it gets a little bit tricky. You'll notice here I'm standing right beside this bomb that's going to blow up, but I figured it was better than standing in the fiery red marks on the ground, so I went with it and I survived, which was great. I've also noticed he kind of has like these shields that go on the side of him every so often, and at that point you can kind of get blasted. Yeah, these shields right there, you just saw them. You'll get blasted back if you hit the side of him where those shields spawned. So as a close range DPS, there's definitely like always something you have to be watching out for, and that's one of the hardest parts here. You'll see that we do have these ads coming in, and unlike other Primal fights that kind of have 4 ads that spawn on like each side of the room, we have these butterflies that kind of roam around, so it's a little bit more tricky to make sure that you do kill all of the ads. They're kind of harder to see and just moving around, so you always have to be kind of tilting your camera looking for any ad you can. Most notably on our first attempt, I think myself included, the DPS weren't ready to jump on the ads as quick as we needed to, and that's ultimately what led us to some issues. We also had a lot of DPS that were dead before the ads came out, which definitely wasn't good either. But you can definitely see the swords going down here. He's charging up his ultimate, and there's definitely still butterflies that are out and about, which isn't good. You can see it's not going super well. It's a really cool ult though, because if the 4 blades weren't enough, he has all these other blades that he just pulls out of somewhere. Don't really want to know where they came from, but he has them raining from the sky, and he's gonna do an ultimate attack that, I mean, I die, so it's kind of sad, but it's one of the coolest ways I've ever died. So if that's something, we all get lifted into the sky, and I just kind of watch everyone dying in the distance, which is really not too great. Not too great at all. But yeah, so that's one of our deaths. Didn't go great, didn't go super well. I don't know what to tell you about it, but we were ready to jump back into the action. The one thing I do enjoy about this level of difficulty in Trials, and I'm not sure if it's the same at higher levels of difficulty, but you do get kind of a buff each time you come and wipe and go back into it. And I believe that's the same thing that happens in the raid finder for WoW nowadays, is that when you do wipe, you kind of get a stacking buff to make sure that eventually you are able to clear it. Because let's be honest, specifically in Final Fantasy XIV, like, this is supposed to be challenging, but it's also a required step for the story. So if you don't end up getting it through this, it's not going to be fun. And that kind of, it's a hard thing to balance, because you want the bosses to feel impactful, you want them to be this challenging thing to get through, but you do want ultimately people who aren't necessarily the best at certain things to get through them so they can experience the rest of the game. So I definitely, hats off to developers who kind of have to balance that, because I'm sure it's one of the hardest conversations to have, is how difficult should the boss be to begin. Obviously, the easier way to deal with it, and a lot of games do this, including Final Fantasy XIV, is you do have the different difficulty levels once you get to higher end gameplay, where you do get the better rewards if you are going for the higher difficulty. You'll notice there, and I didn't talk about it, but I'm getting pretty good at jumping out when that attack happens, when he switches phases. I'm always really proud when I use my sort of evasive jump backwards properly, because there's a lot of times where it doesn't work out well and I go launching off into the abyss, and I just got to really talk about the times where it does go well. Because if you can't enjoy that, you're not going to enjoy anything very much. So this attempt overall, I don't know if this was better or worse than the initial one. I think the big issue we had for a long time here is we had a lot of people just dying to the AoEs on the ground and stuff like that, and when you have that and then you're getting to the ad phase, it's not going to be a good time, because you're just not going to have enough people to kill the ads, and it really gets out of hand, right? You kind of need to have everyone there for the ad phase to be able to pass that. Because it essentially is your DPS check, right? Like, if you're not able to kill these ads, you're gonna get pretty much one-shotted, unless maybe you're a tank or something like that, or some sick maneuver happens. And it's an interesting thing, because you kind of want to save a lot of your cooldowns maybe for getting through some of these ads, but you also want to make sure everyone's alive, like, up to the ad. So it's a balancing thing for sure, where you're always wondering, should I use this skill now? Should I use it later? I find generally, like, when I'm looking at my cooldowns, yes, it's nice to use it during burn phases, but I'd always be sad if I died before I got to use a cooldown, and then it's like, ugh, I should have just used it. Or if you don't use it and you could have used it twice in a fight, that's also a big challenge as well. And I think that's harder the first time you go through a fight, versus when you do, a fight or a raid over and over again for gear. You kind of get the timing down, and you're like, okay, I can use this skill probably 2 to 3 times, depending on how quick we are. So it's definitely something you learn. But yeah, you can see here, we did end up getting everyone resurrected for the ultimate attack. However, the ultimate attack itself, I don't think goes super well. which is really unfortunate because it's like, oh, we did all that work to get everyone back up, and now he just gets to kill everyone, which probably made him super, super happy, but wasn't great for the rest of us. It's a cool attack, and you can see here, yeah, everyone but pretty much the tanks were killed. So we'll move on to our next attempt here. I think actually it was 4 attempts, just looking at that. I thought it was 3 originally, but I think it's 4. And this is the third attempt. Sorry, I'm getting confusing. The third attempt was my best attempt. This is the one I'd like to take home because there's a couple things that go really, really well here. Number 1, you'll notice that I popped all my cooldowns, and I think this is the burn phase, and it's going really, really well. Got my rotation going, you know, things are just jamming out in my mind. I'm watching kind of the cast bar, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'll evade the attack here. Beautiful. Kind of do some sneaky dodges. Like, it was just, everything was clicking, it felt like. And I thought we were gonna get it this time. I really, really did. Because we made it through the ad phase too. Like, everything was going hunky-dory, and you can see here we're at 11%. I'm still alive. A lot of people are dead. I'm like, oh no. It's all gonna, it's so hard when you have these wipes where it's so close. And we're getting to the end here, and I'm like, okay, I can use the tier 1 limit break. And I was like, is this worth it? Let's go. It's one of those situations where you're like, I don't want to die with the ability to use this. And I really doubt we were going to get to the tier 2, as you'll see in a second here. We get wiped out pretty quick. But we were doing so well. We got 4%. And you got to remember, before this, we made it pretty much to 50% only. So this was a pretty big jump. But this is our final attempt at it, and it's not a great scene for me, unfortunately. You'll see in a second here, things go pretty poorly, and it's really unfortunate because I was feeling like I had everything down packed. I felt like I understood the mechanics, I understood, you know, I had to kill the ads super quickly, I was paying attention to the entire room, whipping around, looking for these ads, making sure I wasn't standing in any of the fire on the ground, you know, basic DPS things, which I thought went pretty well, and it all comes crashing down so sadly here. It's really hard to know how this is going to end. But hopefully you can look past it and still be proud of the success of this. But it's just... So you'll see, we're just DPSing it up, living the dream. I've really enjoyed DPSing on the Lancer. I'm sure I'm still not perfect. I did take my 2 buffs kind of out of that macro because a few people mentioned it's not wise to have macros, and I was like, okay, I'll just push the buttons when I need to. I thought for some reason that they were both damage boosters, and I was like, okay, I'll just put them on the same button. But looking at the skills, I get what you guys are saying. They're kind of different buttons that you would use in different situations. But yeah, here you'll see I'm standing in a no-no zone, and I get blasted away past the gate and fall to my death. Luckily though, I do get a nice front row seat to the success. Apparently once I died, the entire rest of the trial was able to do everything flawlessly. Like, let's go back to the last video where I was the only one kind of alive and everyone else was dying. But no, everyone executed things perfectly once I was out of the situation. Don't know what that says. Don't know if I'm just like, I don't know, the bad luck charm or something like that, but I'm proud of everyone. We worked together. This was really one of those fights where you got to know people and you got to work together and kind of say, okay, this is what's going wrong. What are we going to do next time, you know? Which is fun. And I leveled up, so there you go. But yeah, we do kill the Bug Lord. He...
Thus does the sacred rite of combat proclaim the victor. I lay my blades at thy feet, child of man.
See, he's nice enough to lay his blades at his feet. He's kind of one of those honorable dudes, you know? Like, he's just like, okay, you beat me fair and square. These guys are pissed. Also, creepiest creatures ever. Like, as someone who's kind of scared of... I'm not scared of bugs, but like... I'm kind of freaked out by certain bugs. These things are pretty creepy, so seeing them scuttle away, I was like, good, go away. But yeah, so we talk about it with our lovely lady, Iceheart here, who goes by so many different names. I prefer Iceheart, though.
Warrior of light, would that I had your skill in battle. I do begin to see why so many place their faith in you.
So she, congratulates us. It's interesting that she didn't trust our skill in battle, since we did defeat her, but,
For all his savagery, I do not think Ravana one to break his word. Provided the dragons do not trespass upon Gnath lands, they should have little to fear of the Primal's biting blades. We have done well, have we not? Come, let us return to Vidofnir and share these glad tidings.
So this was a really big step in us trying to win over kind of the ability to talk with some of the dragons, right? And that's what we're trying to do to prevent them from attacking the main city. And, as always, when we finish a trial, we have some spooky people watching us.
Once more you achieve the impossible, bringer of light. But with every mortal heart that succumbs to fear and fury, another voice is joined to the chorus, beseeching divine succor.
This is going to be such the long burn story where it's going to have a huge payoff. I'm sure of it. I love it.
Will shake the firmament, and your world will be consumed in the swelling storm of chaos.
Ugh, so good. But yeah, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video. I had a lot of fun, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.